Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we jump into tonight's second half, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and the channel membership are in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button. Takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I've taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's second half, shall we? Alright guys, I'm going to share two video clips with you in this upload, and one I do not believe I won't even entertain the idea of it being legit, and the other I am on the fence about, but leaning towards it may being legit. You guys decide. His first encounter is a subscriber Dogman encounter. Hey Jeff, I have a follow-up to my encounter you narrated a couple of months ago. We recently went to my uncle's 50th birthday party at his house, and yeah, he still lives on the land in East Texas that my poppy and I had our auditory encounter on. While at the party and after a few drinks, someone mentioned how incredibly dark it was out there and how beautiful the stars were. My uncle's usual goofy and boisterous demeanor changed immediately. He said, yeah, I used to like going out there and stargazing, but not anymore. We asked him why, and he said we wouldn't believe him if he told us. I knew immediately he had seen that damn thing. I just looked at him and gently said, "What did you see, Unc?" There's some weird shit out there, and I guarantee you, I believe you. His light gray eyes began to well with tears as he lit a cigarette, muttering, "Fuck. Okay, here goes." He took a long drag and started off with, "Y'all know I drink. Y'all know I'm a fucking alcoholic, but I swear to God this happened. I'm not bullshitting. I may get drunk enough to call a bearded officer ma'am, but never, ever have I been so piss drunk to hallucinate shit like this. Plus, I have proof. This happened, okay?" We all reassured him he was safe to tell us what happened.
At the time, my dad piped up and said, "Brother, I remember you calling me when this happened. I know you're not lying." My uncle smiled a soft smile, took a drag off his cigarette, and said, "Thanks, brother." He shook the tears off his face and said, "Okay. So y'all know when I get hammered, I like to lie in my truck cab, listening to the radio and stargazing, right?" We all nodded. He continues, "One night about, 10 years ago now, I was out there, laid up with my feet on the door panel against the driver's side and my head against the passenger side, cocked back, just looking at the stars. It was just so damn beautiful." He paused, and I noticed he was visibly shaking. I'm lying there, smoking a cig, so the window's cracked about a quarter of the way down. So I'm lying there, singing like a fool, and all of a sudden, the entire truck shook. It shook like when you drop a ton of gravel in the bed of a truck. I knew the tailgate was open, so I immediately was like, what the fuck was that? I'm lying there, still as I can be, thinking one of you fuckers was messing with me. No sooner that crossed my mind, something jumped on 2 feet up on the cab truck. You hear me? 2 feet. So now I'm freaking the fuck out, and I don't know why. I'm sweating, shaking, and it was like every last ounce of goodness in the world was sucked right out, and all that was left was despair and pure terror. As my mind was trying to figure this shit out, I realized it's gotten dark in the truck. There was no moon, no stars, nothing. He pauses, and tears stream down his face. He looks up and says, "It was looking right at me. The fucking thing was on top of the truck, leaned over, looking in the window at me." I pissed myself. I've been drinking all my life, and never, ever have I sobered up that fast. It was growling at me. I could feel it. My whole body shook as this thing leaned in closer and growled again. I could see spit dripping off its teeth, and fuck, it had red eyes. The most soulless, God-forsaken red eyes. It was a demon. I'm telling you, it was a fucking demon that showed up in the shape of a werewolf. There, I said it. It was a goddamn werewolf. He began to sob, and my dad put his arm around his little brother, hugging him and telling him it was okay. "You're safe, brother." My uncle, a man that had carried me in his arms as he ran for our lives into a cellar away from a tornado, the same man that used his body to shield me from a lightning strike that hit the barn not 50 yards from us, was reduced to rubble at the sight of this thing. I watched in silence as my dad and his other brother comforted their youngest brother and helped him gain his composure. It was a rather moving sight. These are 3 good old boys from Texas. They truly are a man's man, crass and burly, but in that moment they were all compassionate and gentle with their brother, who was clearly hurting. They just don't make men like that anymore. My uncle composed himself and finished his story. I screamed like I've never screamed before. Without even thinking, I'm screaming, "Jesus, help me, Jesus." The thing snorted or sneezed and looked pissed. That was when I knew I was dead. I had a 12 gauge in the floorboard, so I desperately searching for it with my right hand. Before I knew it, the damn thing jumped off the truck and bolted on 2 feet like a damn Olympian into the woods. I just sat there shaking. I don't even know for how long. I was terrified, too terrified to get out of the truck. I do know I sat there until the sun came up. I wasn't taking any chances with that thing. My 12 gauge would have been like a tummy tickle to this thing, so I really didn't want to have to engage it. Kitten, you remember what happened to you and Dad in the old goat barn, right? Yeah, he saw the fucking thing. He's seen it many times, which is why he was always walking the fence line at night and would lose his mind if you or your brother was outside at night. That's why he started walking you all to the bus. One of the last things Dad told me before he died was, make sure them things don't get the babies. Points at my brother and myself, and then to my grown cousins. It has taken 22 years for me to have confirmation, but I now know without a doubt my granddad, dad, and uncles weren't messing around in the barn for fun. They were warding this thing off of our property by any means necessary. My poppy died in 2000, leaving us with a gaping hole in our heart and one man down on the surveillance team. Shortly after that, all of us moved off the property except my uncle and his wife. He says to this day he knows when that thing is around because even the wind goes silent. He won't leave his house no matter what. When that happens, and frankly, I don't blame him. I don't know what these things are, but I agree with my uncle. They are demons in the flesh. This encounter scared my uncle, but it also rooted his faith in Christ again because he knows what the face of pure evil now looks like. Alright guys, I was not going to include the young lady's encounter that she was talking about in the beginning. But while I was reading this, her uncle's encounter, I thought back to hers and how absolutely an amazing encounter it was. Horrifying, but amazing. And it was all auditory. Her grandfather, Poppy, used to call her kitten. And this is her story, so it'll make some sense to the people who haven't heard it. Anyhow, I'll give you the encounter now. It's definitely an auditory encounter, as we never saw the thing. When I was 10, my father and grandfather purchased 56 acres of land out in Texas, between Lake Fork and Lake Tawakoni. The land was purchased from a wheelchair-bound man whose wife took over tending to the farm with help of sharecroppers from Mexico. They lived in a little shack on the back 5 acres of land right next to a pond. We called it a lake house. My parents purchased a mobile home, but it wouldn't be here for a few months. My younger brother and I lived with our grandparents in an old pier and beam farmhouse for the remainder of the summer and into the beginning of the school year, so that we would be able to start school that year. Despite the farmhouse's dilapidated condition, it had a brand new, fully enclosed back porch that housed a washer-dryer, deep freezers, and storage units. There were 2 screen doors on the opposite ends of the porch. One led to the carport and the other out towards the goat yard and crop fields. I've always been an adventurous type of girl, so at 10, this place was my dream. My brother and I had a tree house. In every tree we could manage. We spent all our time when we weren't helping harvest crops, playing in the creek and the ponds on the property. The main road ran in front of our property. About a quarter mile down, there was a massive hill, with a bridge at the bottom of it going over the creek. Once you came up the other side of that hill, there was a sharp 90-degree curve that led you back out to the main highway. This was a gravel road, I should mention. At first, we liked to walk down the road and play in the creek. But then we started to notice how eerily quiet it was down there, and there was a feeling of being watched, and it was overwhelming. As the summer grew to a close and the sharecroppers moved off the land, the son of the sharecroppers told my brother and I about a young girl who was found slaughtered in the creek just a few weeks before my family purchased the farm. Her murderer was never found. That left us with an even more uneasy feeling. We began to notice how eerily silent and the feeling of being watched was happening down at the lake house, which is the shack on the pond that the sharecroppers used to live in. Actually, the feeling of being watched seemed to happen any time we were without adult supervision. One night, the goats and the chickens were making an awful ruckus. My grandpa had been told by some of the other local farmers that there was a massive cat snagging livestock from their herds. He immediately grabbed his .22 and told me to grab a flashlight. I obeyed, and we were out the door. Once we had cleared both gates that led out into the goat yard, things were silent, except for the sounds of the creaking floorboards of the hayloft above the goat barn. We could hear something huge walking around above our heads as we were approaching the barn. I think my grandfather felt the same feeling of dread that I did the closer we got. My grandfather leveled his weapon, and immediately there was a blood-curdling growl, howl, scream that came reverberating through our chests. I was frozen in place. My 10-year-old brain couldn't comprehend what we had just heard. My next memory is of my grandfather screaming at me in a tone of voice I had never heard before nor after this occasion. "Run, kitten! Run! Run, kitten!" Kitten was my nickname my grandparents called me. We both ran the 70 yards, jumped over the 2 gates back to the house in what felt like a lifetime. My grandfather would never tell me what he saw, but from that moment until he died 6 years later, he never wanted us to go outside alone at night. Like I said, we never saw the thing, but the feeling and the sound we got from this thing was otherworldly. We lost a few goats that year and began keeping the mama and the babies on the enclosed back porch for the first few weeks of their life in effort to keep them safe. Tonight's second encounter is a couple of encounters that I found that have something to do with the land between the lakes. Now, we all know what the land between the lakes are synonymous for, but this puts a little spin on things, makes it a little bit different. Anyway, here goes. The first incident was related by one gentleman who told me that when he was in high school, he would hang out at an old ice cream shop that used to be just east of Lake Berkeley Bridge. He told me that he was at the shop one evening after dark when 2 older women pulled into the parking lot and seemed very shaken and scared. Being a small town and wanting to offer help if they needed it, he asked if they were okay. At first, they were reluctant to tell him what had happened, but eventually they related the events that had happened on their way back from Murray, Kentucky. They were heading through the land between the lakes and were nearing the overpass that goes over the Trace. They were talking and were just about to go over the overpass when something was in the middle of their lane. At first, they couldn't see it clearly, but as they got closer, they could see that it was a devil creature with wings and horns and red skin. They also related that this being had a pitchfork in its hand. By the time they got close enough to see it and determine what it was, they were right on top of it and about to hit it. The one lady related that they drove right through it and it disappeared. This event had scared these 2 old ladies, and they decided that stopping at an ice cream shop would be safe for them and would give them a few minutes to calm their nerves. They waited a while and left on their way home. During the time of the second event, there were stirrings and tales related concerning a red-skinned winged creature that would swoop at passing cars on a particular stretch of road in the country. There was a gentleman who was heading home from work one evening and was approaching this stretch of road and had no idea that something scary was about to take place. As he came around the bend in the road and started to ascend a hill, there was a winged creature that swooped down at his vehicle. No doubt the man was scared and probably swerved to avoid the collision with the being as it flew across the hood of his vehicle. After it made its pass, he continued to drive home, where he recounted the story to his family. News of the event spread quickly within the community, and a group of men went back to the location in an attempt to hunt the creature down and kill it. Upon their arrival, there was no sign of the creature. Today's third encounter brings us to Lawrence County, Indiana, October of 1981. This sighting occurred in October of 1981. I had just been discharged from the Marine Corps. I was 21 years old at the time. I've lived in this area of Indiana all my life. I'm an avid hunter and outdoorsman with much experience. I'm a raccoon hunter. Also, I've been hunting at night by myself many times. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in late October. My sister and her boyfriend and his sister and myself went on a picnic at Spring Mill State Park. After the picnic, my sister's boyfriend and her went home. The other girl and myself decided to go out riding around in the country to enjoy the fall leaves. We were heading east of Bedford, Indiana, on a small gravel road near the airport. This road went to a small creek bottom by Leatherwood Creek. There was a thick forest on one side of the road and a cornfield on the other, surrounded by thick briars. We had crossed the bridge over Leatherwood Creek, and I pulled my 4x4 truck off the side of the road. We were heading east. I was looking down, adjusting the radio, when my companion stated someone was watching us. I looked up, and to my disbelief, I saw something standing in the middle of the road about 50 to 60 yards in front of us. This thing was at least 7 feet tall, standing upright. It was covered in long, dark gray and brown hair. I couldn't see its face. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My companion was terrified. I slowly removed my M1 carbine from its case and inserted a magazine. The creature continued to watch us closely. I opened the truck door and stepped out onto the road. I began to move slowly towards the creature. As I did, it turned and ran through the briars into the cornfield. I returned to the truck very shaken. I've never seen anything like this. My companion insisted that I take her home, which I did. We never went out again. I've often wondered why I didn't fire my weapon at this creature. I guess it looked somewhat human-like, and it made no threatening behavior. I never reported this incident because I figured no one would believe me anyway. Today's fourth and final encounter. A woman lives on a farm, and there's a 100-acre parcel land that is owned by a neighbor that adjoins their property. She and her husband were maintaining the 100-acre parcel for their neighbor in exchange for the right to ride their horses on that property. One afternoon, she got a call from the neighbor, who sounded a bit frantic on the phone. He's an older gentleman who frequently hunted in the small patch of woods on the back of the 100 acres. He called and asked her if she had recently been riding her horse on the property, and she related that she had been not. He seemed relieved and began to relate the events of the morning. He had gone into the patch of woods on the back of the property and found a place to sit and call the turkeys on the edge of a small clearing that was maybe about 40 to 50 yards wide. He thought it would be a good place to try to lure an old Tom in, because he'd be able to see him coming from across the clearing. He had gotten into position, sat down, and decided to wait a bit before calling. He'd been sitting there for about 15-20 minutes when he heard the sound of something moving through the woods in the direction of the midpoint of the clearing. He related that at first glance it looked like a bear down on all fours, walking into the clearing. He said it walked up maybe 15 yards into the clearing and stood up like a man. It looked around for a few seconds before it walked across the clearing on 2 legs and into the woods. The man left the woods soon after, and it went out of sight. He felt the need to warn her about his sighting of this creature. He suggested that she not ride in that area for a while. He didn't know what it was, but he was sure it wasn't a bear. He related that it walked like a man as it moved across the clearing, and that it shook him pretty bad because he didn't know what it was. When asked whether or not she had noticed anything out of the ordinary on their farm, and initially she said no. She then related that she was riding her horse on the back of the property one day, and there was nobody else on the property. She was coming up the hill, and out of nowhere, something large hit her in the back. Based on her reaction, I gather that the impact hurt, and she was also upset about mud getting all over her jacket. She related that she looked and could see it was a large softball-sized mud ball that had hit her right in the middle of the back. She said she looked around and tried to see who had thrown it at her, and was going to give him a piece of her mind. There was nobody there that she could see. Today's subscriber's first Dogman encounter. This happened a few years ago when I was 10 years old. I have 3 encounters, and this is the first one. I have family near the L.B.L, and I've visited them for years now. The area that my grandpa lived in was heavily wooded with a long gravel driveway. I was always allowed to play outside, but my grandpa made it very clear to be in the house before sunset. I would play around the house till dusk all the time. At the time, my grandpa had a large German Shepherd mixed with Great Dane named Sergeant. Well, Sergeant was a protective dog who would never leave my side while I was playing. I remember playing in the back of the property, and I was kicking a soccer ball against an old tool shed with Sergeant lying down on a stone walkway. I guess time got away from me, and it was getting dark. As I kicked the ball one last time, I heard a long, drawn-out growl from the right of me. It was Sergeant. His hair was standing on end, looking at the woods. As I looked, I could see the shadow of something moving around in the woods. As it drew closer, I could see its shape. It was down on all fours, staring at Sergeant. At this point, it's almost pitch black outside. I remember Sergeant starting to bark ferociously. I guess this pissed the creature off because it in return growled back at him. The vibration from the growl shaked my ribcage, and the animal took a step out of the tree line and bared its teeth at us. About this time, I heard a loud boom followed by an intense ringing in my ear. My grandpa had shot at this creature. I don't remember if he hit it, but I remember it tearing back into the woods. My grandpa then pulled me back up the walkway to the porch with Sergeant followed behind me. Grandpa was angry with me. He was yelling at me the whole time back to the house. I'd never heard my grandpa yell, and I started to cry. As we entered the house, my grandma looked like she had seen a ghost, and I was sent upstairs to go to sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night to Grandma and Grandpa talking about what happened. Grandpa said I never thought it would get this close to the house. I think I hit it this time, I'm not sure. Grandma then intervened, saying, "You better hope you didn't hit it. Don't you remember what happened last time you shot at it? What it did to Daisy?" Daisy was an old dog they had owned a few years ago. I was always told that she had just run away from home. I picked up the pieces pretty quick that thing had butchered Daisy and left a pile of what used to be her around the house. Well, the argument started to die down between them, and about 20 minutes later, they started to get silent and everybody went back to rest. I went back to my bedroom and tried to sleep. What I think was 2 hours of sleeping, my body was flung awake to Sergeant barking at the window. And about 35 yards up the hill, looking directly at me, was the creature. It had yellowish amber eyes. The pupils looked blank of compassion, only full of evil, and they were fixed on me. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't even breathe. Then all of a sudden I screamed. As soon as I did this, the creature stood up on its back legs and ran further up the hill, dipping behind the ridge. My grandpa came running up the stairs with his deer rifle and flung into the room. I told him that it was back and asked him what that thing was. He said it was a bear. I could tell he was lying because he was in a cold sweat and on the verge of crying. He told me not to be scared in a shaky voice and told me to go to sleep with my grandma. I awoke to the smell of bacon and eggs in the morning. Grandpa was sleeping heavily in the living room chair with his rifle on his lap, looking at the door. I wasn't allowed outside for the rest of my stay, and the last 2 days of my stay were uneventful. I gave my grandpa and grandma a big hug, and my parents picked me up and I went back home. It brings a lot of emotions back up that I tried to hide away, but the story about the L.B.L. brought my emotions back to light. I'm literally shaking telling you this story right now. My grandpa has since passed, but my grandma is still living up at the house, and Sergeant has since passed as well. He lived to be about 15, so the old boy lived a long, healthy life. I now know why my grandpa was always so strict on the woods. I've since been told his story. If you want to hear, let me know. Thanks, Jeff. It feels good to get that off my chest. My best friends don't even know about this story. Only my close family knows. The other 2 stories are when I was 16 and 18. I'm now 24, by the way. Our subscribers' second Dogman encounter. This happened on L.B.L. At the time, I was staying with my grandparents for about a month. During this time, I agreed to a camping trip on the L.B.L. The L.B.L. is a beautiful place. The lakes are so peaceful, the trails are always nice, and the nature helps clear your mind. My girlfriend at the time owned a camper. For the sake of keeping her name private, we'll just call her Jessica. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love nature. I have a deep respect for nature. And I always will be in the woods. Jessica, on the other hand, doesn't like the woods. She loved spending time with me. The first day was uneventful. We hiked for a little bit, then went to the lakes and went back to the camper. The second day, Jessica and I went for a hike for longer than we expected. We ended up back at the camper with a few hours of daylight. We sat in the camper for a little bit to gain a little energy. Jessica said she wanted to see the stars at night. Me being tired from all the hiking, I reluctantly agreed. We exited the camper to the moonlight night and proceeded to start the almost 20-minute walk to the lakes. About 15 minutes into the walk, I noticed how silent it truthfully was. The normal sounds were absent. No crickets, no owls, not even a wind blowing. I didn't pay much attention to it. Me being a 16-year-old boy at the time, I was focused only on one thing. We made it to the lake and had to walk down the shore a little ways. I then lay out the blanket. After an hour of watching the stars, things started to heat up a little. I then noticed the woods and the lake were absolutely silent. Usually when the woods go silent like that, a predator is usually nearby. That's not all the time true, but it's a great indicator. I started to get this overwhelming feeling of being watched, and all of a sudden that primal fear I felt at Grandpa's house came flooding back. Just about this time, Jessica pointed to the tree line and said, "I swear I just saw something big move behind that tree." I instantly jumped up and grabbed her hand and told her we need to leave right now. She was confused and wanted answers. I knew what that thing in the woods was. I proceeded to grab her hand and pull her towards the trail. We got onto the trail only for my worst fear to be confirmed. I looked back to the meadow to see this thing low to the ground, slowly crawling towards us. I then told Jessica we need to move faster and kept looking back to see where it had gone. About 2 minutes into the trail, I looked back to see the creature getting onto the trail. I looked at Jessica and told her not to look back down the trail and keep looking forward. As soon as I finished this statement, she did exactly what I told her not to do. She saw it. She became frozen in fear. I had to pull her forward to try to keep her going. The creature at that time was about 100 yards down the trail. When Jessica snapped out of her fear, she started to cry profusely. I tried to get her to go forward. In that 5-second window, I lost track of it. All of the senses kicked in overdrive, trying to hear or see where this thing had gone. Eventually, Jessica started moving again. We made good time, maybe 5-10 minutes left on the trail. My senses were all in, time high, still trying to see if that creature was still following us. I suddenly got hit by the smell of rotten meat and dog piss adjacent to me. My heart sank when I saw its shadow maybe 15 yards off the trail. I told Jessica to move faster, and she stood still demanding answers, so I yelled at her to move faster. This shocked the creature's ears, twitched like a dog's would. The creature sat there for a little bit, then all hell broke loose. The creature stepped back onto the trail, and Jessica locked eyes with it. She froze in fear again for about 2 seconds. Jessica was standing there, frozen in fear, and suddenly she screamed. This creature then stood up on its back legs in its full height and roared at us. The sheer size of the creature is out of this world. The path was easily 5 feet wide where it stood, and when I was 16, I was 6'1". I thought I was tall. This thing was easily 3 feet taller than me. I grabbed Jessica by the hand and ran as fast as we could up the trail. I felt tears streaming down my face. I started seeing my life flash before my eyes. I thought to myself, I will never get to see my family again. Will they ever know what happened to me? About this time, I snapped back to me running. I looked up the trail and saw the trailhead. I heard this thing chasing after us. It sounded like an 18-wheeler in the forest with full head of steam. We burst into the clearing with Jessica hot on my heels. My lungs felt like I was breathing lava. I didn't hear it running after us when we got halfway through the clearing. We didn't stop. We kept running till we got to the camper. I slammed the door behind both of us. We were crying profusely. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours. Then Jessica broke the silence by saying, "What the hell was that thing?" in between sobs and breathing. I knew exactly what it was. I told her I didn't know. I cuddled her, trying to calm her down for 30 minutes of cuddling, and then she fell asleep. I tried to stay awake all night, but I fell asleep with a knife in my hand. I awoke to heavy footsteps on the gravel. My heart skipped a beat, and I heard whatever it was, a large sniff, and walk a few laps around the camper, then leave. I soon fell asleep again. I awoke to the sounds of birds chirping. I sat there for a few minutes and heard nothing else. I exited the camper and instantly got hit with the strongest smell of really old dog piss, but 50 times stronger, with bleach in it. I heard Jessica start to stir in the camper. I walked back into the camper and gave her a kiss and told her not to talk about what happened to anybody. We gained our composure and left early that morning. Jessica and I are still close. She's one of my best friends now. I talk to her almost every day. That happened almost 10 years ago, and we've only talked about it 2 times. She flat out refuses to talk about it to this day. I tried to ask her a few days ago about what had happened and get some details from her and her side of the story. She shot me down within seconds. Our subscriber's third and final Dogman encounter. As you know, I've always loved the outdoors. I was always in the woods since I was 6. I enjoyed hunting, fishing, and hiking. This encounter happened when I was 18, and as you know, my grandfather owned a large chunk of property. We worked hard to keep the property healthy year-round. I remember learning about this buck, which was a good-sized boy at the time, a 12-pointer with a beautiful spread. I studied his scrape lines and his morning routine. The day finally came, opening morning of rifle season. I got up around 4:30 in the morning, eager to get to my stand. I hit the woods in full stride, getting to my stand, hoping I could intercept the big buck on his way to his bed. The crack of dawn started to come through the trees. The birds were well and alive. The forest was active with the normal sounds until about 7. The woods went dead silent around 8. A few minutes went by and I heard the crunching of leaves on top of the ridge. Watching the scrape lines the deer left, my heart started beating fast, thinking I was going to bag his monster buck. I soon realized that it wasn't a deer walking towards my stand. The animal sounded too heavy to be a deer. I got an uneasy feeling, followed by that deep sense of dread and danger. I soon smelled that same smell I did a few years ago, and I started to panic. I felt my heart beating faster and faster. I realized I had my .270 on me with a few spare rounds in my pocket. I got a sense of confidence. The creature got halfway down the valley, maybe 60 yards or so away from me. I didn't make a sound. I went stiff as a board, hoping the creature wouldn't see me. It got right in front of my stand, and this creature turned and instantly locked eyes on me. I panicked. I pulled my rifle up and looked down the sight, and the creature growled at me. The vibrations were strong enough for me to feel it right through the metal stand. I loaded a shot, and the creature's growling even got louder. My mind told me not to shoot at it. It wouldn't help if I pissed it off even more. I lowered my rifle, and the creature started to pace around the base of the tree where my stand was. After a few laps, the creature kept going down the pathway. I stayed in my stand for what felt like hours. I knew the creature wasn't gone. I still had that feeling of being watched. Eventually, it subsided, and the woods went back to life. I eventually made my way back down that stand, and I didn't hunt for the rest of that season. Looking back on it, I have zero idea how that creature saw me or even knew I was there. I sprayed my scent removal kit before I entered the woods. I was wearing my camo, and I had the top of my stand covered with a blind. I felt powerless, even with my rifle. It knew what rifles were. I don't know how, but it definitely did. I'm still a little hesitant to enter those woods. I've never returned to the back part of that property. I only hunt the front side now. I grew up near the L.B.L, and there was a place called Vampire Hotel that was actually a foundation from a hotel during the 20s. That was torn down in the late 90s. Now, I never personally met a vampire in Murray or around the L.B.L, and have no clue as to why people called it Vampire Hotel. But we spent many a night there partying and never saw anything weird except melting candles and wavy walls. I do, however, have a story that was told to me by 2 of my uncles. At a bottom near Marshall County, Cowway County line, very close to Kentucky Lake, which is the L.B.L. basically. It really scared the crap out of me when I was a kid because they swore they would never go back to that area. And they are real outdoorsmen who don't get scared very easily, or so I thought. The story goes that my 2 uncles were coon hunting. They had 3 coon dogs with them, their best by their account. They heard a yelp ahead. Well, the 2 dogs went running by them like they were being chased by something, and the other one was nowhere to be found. Now, most people don't know this, but most coon dogs are mean as hell and don't back down from anything. Not in West Kentucky, anyway. My uncle said that when he saw the dogs running back toward them, something bad was going on because this never happened. He said they made their way to where they heard that yelp and found the missing dog. It had been attacked by something, and he had to shoot it because it was so badly hurt. They had no clue what could have done this other than a bear or some other really big animal. But in this area of the country, we really don't have big predators that we know of. A black bear was spotted in northwest Tennessee in the early 2000s, but never in the L.B.L. Now, the really weird stuff started happening, they said. When they were shining their lights around the dog's body, they said they didn't see any tracks, and then they heard a loud scream behind them from where they had just been, and it was like nothing they ever heard before. Well, at this point, they decided to shag ass back to their truck, and something threw a rock or something at them. They couldn't tell what was thrown, but something flew through the air and hit the tree. On their way back to the truck, they said they kept hearing things in the brush.
and then they would hear something in the trees, like they were being stalked by something that was able to get into the trees, and they never did see anything except branches moving, like something had just been there. They said they fired some shots to try to scare whatever it was that was following them, but whatever it was followed them all the way back to their truck. When they got to the truck, the 2 other dogs were lying down in their cages, and they said they never hunted that area again. Now, this story was told to me by 2 uncles who did their fair share of drinking while hunting. You only coon hunt at night, so it definitely was dark, but I see no reason that they would lie about it. I know the dog did die. I can only add that I never seen either of them look scared, especially while hunting, but they said something was out there, and they never encountered it before. They had lived there their whole life since the 40s. Something killed Uncle Dale's favorite dog, which I would have thought would have pissed him off more than anything, to make him want to kill whatever was out there, but he swore he never would go back out there again. Today's second encounter. I used to believe Dogman were fake until I saw one summer. It was around dusk and I had settled in, but it was still light enough to see. All of a sudden, my friend busts through the front door yelling about something in the neighboring field. I decided to entertain him and followed him out to the field. We walked about a half a mile, and I still didn't see anything, and I wanted to go back, but he insisted. So I reluctantly followed, and just before we reached the old slaughtering house, I saw a rather large canine about 70 feet away. It was sitting on its haunches, and I thought, that's a big dog, until it stood up and ran on both legs toward the old slaughtering house. Both of us thought it was a rather good idea to head for the hills, so we headed back to my house, and it followed us. By then it was dark, so we were about to retreat to my house and lock up. And then came a smell so foul and terrible. I still remember it. That terrible smell was only comparable to rotten human flesh. Just then it ran in front of us, about 30 feet away. I estimated its height to be 7.5 feet. We bolted in and stayed there for the rest of the night. But the dogs in the neighborhood would not stop barking. We went outside in the morning and the smell still lingered. The smell stayed for days, and on the 3rd night around midnight, the sound of a window being forced out woke me up. I took a knife and explored and found that a window pane had been completely forced without breaking the glass. After the smell disappeared, and I haven't seen one since. There's no explanation for the animal, and there was no evidence, so I really don't know. I did decide to share this, but I really don't know what it was. I live near L.B.L, and people tell stories of a beast like the one I saw. Today's third part of the upload. I moved to a small town near L.B.L when I was 16. That was in the late 80s. I'd left Detroit and moved to the country with my dad. There's a lot of old ground in that area, and I would spend hours in the woods without ever seeing anyone. 2 things struck me as odd about the area. Number 1, I was given a 16-gauge shotgun and told never to go in the woods unarmed, which was odd because in Detroit my dad always told me not to get involved with guns. Number 2, there were signs along the roads back then that said, "Do not exit your vehicle during hours of darkness." They said to lock your doors and turn on your hazard lights and wait for park services. I'd always assumed it was due to the amount of illegal activity that took place in L.B.L. They used to make moonshine in the area. Now it's mostly meth. I was stationed at Fort Campbell and used to hike L.B.L. several times a week up until last year. I never saw anything out of the ordinary, but I stayed on well-used trails. Today's fourth part of the upload. A woman and her son who live on a mountaintop in Breeding, Kentucky had reported what they described as a dogman, werewolf, bipedal canine type of creature. The woman said that the possible cryptid had been heard howling in a close vicinity of their property, and that one night the thing banged on the side of her house. They shot at the creature, but no blood or prints were found afterward. They also report
that they have found evidence of something prowling around their land and still occasionally hear the howling, now in the distance. Kentucky has many canine-like related sightings and legends. The beast between the lakes, the wolf man that roams western Kentucky. There are others, including an interesting account from Bath, Kentucky. People who have seen Barilla say it's a beast with wolf-like features. Sounds like something found in fairy tales, but some researchers say people have seen the creature and even been attacked by it for decades right here in Kentucky. In Lex 18 Mystery Monday, Courtney Fisher goes in search of evidence of its existence. Kentucky's backwoods keeps quite a few secrets. Secrets that, if you're lucky, will reveal themselves, but some, no matter how patient you are, stay hidden. Barilla lurks in the woods, so the experts say, with the last known sighting occurring in 1989. The broad-shouldered beast has a body of a bear and a long, pointed muzzle like a wolf, hands with dagger-like claws and canine teeth. It's allegedly been seen through parts of Kentucky, Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada, Pennsylvania, with dozens of sightings reported. Of course, the first case in 1940s, said researcher Ron Coffey. A young boy claimed to be attacked on the creek bank by the creature. I don't discount that many eyewitnesses. Everyone's just not imagining things and making it up. Coffey's not found any bones or remains, but says he can prove Barilla exists, a plaster cast of footprint Coffey has. He found the track last winter in Bath County, and it matches the description of Barilla's footprint. Every single legend is based on some kind of fact, he states. Stories don't just materialize. Coffey may have been researching Barilla for more than 2 decades, but there's another person who's had eyes on the woods for just as long, and he lives right across the street. I think someone's trying to start a good hoax, said skeptic John Poe. With a laugh, that's my opinion. Poe says he has his own proof there is no Barilla. His roosters and his chickens roam the yard, and they have never been attacked by the monstrous beast. At night time, it's always peaceful and quiet, he said. You don't hear anything going on. And that's enough for Poe. To know that no 7-foot wolf-like creature is lurking the woods across the way. I'll believe it when I see it, he states. But Coffey says it's only a matter of time until another clue surfaces and another eyewitness comes forward, proving Barilla exists. Lex 18 wanted to talk to someone who claims they've actually seen Barilla, but Coffey says the last surviving witness recently died. That last part was a old news footage from Kentucky station, Lex 18 obviously, and covered the mysterious dog-like creature called Barilla. I've covered a few stories of the Barilla, which is just another name for a Dogman. Like the Gugly is just another name for the type 3 Sasquatch Kumbo discusses, or / werewolf. Too many names and too many confusion, I guess, with so many names. But the important thing is we know that there is something bipedal, hairy, that lurks the woods. Some look like an ape, some look like a huge, gigantic dog. Who knows? Today's fifth part is a little more history on the land between the lakes. The National Recreation Area in western Kentucky that also runs down to Tennessee, called Land Between the Lakes, or L.B.L. for short. It's situated between Kentucky and Barclay Lake, consisting of more than 300 miles of shoreline, 17,000 acres of forest, and over 200 miles of walking trails. It's currently a focal point for over a $6 million in tourist industry. Prior to 1959, before Kentucky and Lake Barclay dams were constructed, and before it was officially called L.B.L. in 1963 by President John F. Kennedy, and before
TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, the federal government used its powers of eminent domain to buy and tear down all the houses, businesses, and community buildings throughout the area, forcing over 700 families to give up their homes, took over the land, and the area was called Between the Rivers. There's over 228 small family cemeteries, many forgotten about and lost, dotted throughout the area, as it was once used as homes for the early Kentucky settlers. Some of the earliest graves date back to the early 1700s, which include graves of white settlers, veterans from nearly every war, including the Revolutionary one, and also those of black slaves and Chinese immigrants who worked in the iron furnaces that were in the area. There was also a very high infant mortality rate, and many of these children were buried right outside of their cabins from where they were born, so that their mother could peer out of the window and see the grave. There are also numerous Native American graves scattered throughout the acres, much older than even the earliest settlers. Others lie in secret beneath layers of leaves and forest ferns. Before the 1950s, it was always been a very rural area to live, with farmsteads far and few between, and with really no town to speak of except up at the north end of Grand Rivers. It was in this town, back in the mid-70s, that the beast between the rivers, or what is now the beast of L.B.L, was heard from. Some of the old-timers would sit on long wooden benches outside of the IGA, that used to be an old country store for decades before the grocery conglomerate came to town. We used to hang around there on the weekends during the day and listen to stories they would tell each other. These old men, most of whom lived in the L.B.L before they were forced to move, had some very interesting stories to tell about the part of that country. There was talkings of hauntings, Indian curses, mysterious lights over gravestones at night, an old hag witch that lived deep in the woods, and more importantly, several tales of a wolf-like creature that stood on two legs that would come out of the thickets and attack their cattle and livestock day or night. A creature that was taller than the average man by well over a foot, nearly 7 foot tall, with thick, long hair covering its body, and a stench that matched, that some compared to open, fresh graves that were discovered now and then. This wolf creature left tracks like a barefooted man, but where the toes should have been, instead of were paw prints. The head was huge and wolf-like in appearance, with an extra long snout, and uncanny long, sharp incisors that glistened from the moonlight with saliva, along with the eyes that radiated red, like those from the hottest fires in hell, they said. It had long arms that ended with huge hands, and long, spindly fingers with long, pointed, dirt-caked claws. At night, they would hear it howl, unnaturally guttural sounds of painful hunger and agony, and at that warning, all would go out and tie up their livestock, and even bring their prized selections inside of their homes with them. The legend of this beast went back at least hundreds of years and was passed along through time from family to family and updated as new sightings occurred. One old man said that his great-great-great-granddaddy told him the creature used to be a man, a Native American, that had the ability to shapeshift, a powerful shaman that had been outcast from his tribe because he used his magic for evil. The shaman had been tracked and killed while in his wolf state by a few warriors and a couple of settlers in the area. In his dying breath he cursed them and vowed to return from the dead to haunt the forests and seek revenge on their families and all who lived there. Another man on the bench with a leathery, weathered face said he heard from his grandma the beast was once a settler that came over from Europe back in the early 1800s with a disease that made him turn into a madman at night. The disease was eventually passed along to his children, which never went to school but stayed hidden away from the population. Many thought the family died off because for years
they never seen or heard of them, and after investigations by some brave men, they discovered the homestead vacant and abandoned in the early 1900s. The sighting of the monster were still frequent throughout the beginning of the 20th century, and the elderly group on the bench each told some unsettling encounters they or members of their family had had with it. Each one told stories of finding livestock slaughtered, ripped to pieces, and eaten upon. Cows and pigs with their legs dismembered from the sockets. Even a few horses had met their end with savage attacks upon their body. A few of them describe what they saw at different times when they only caught glimpses of a figure by peeking out of the curtains or windows at night. One man said it jumped out of one of the horse stalls one evening while he was putting some animals up. It stopped in front of him, arms spread out like it was going to grab a hold of him, let out a howl, and sprang past him into the dusky shadows. This particular man said he wet his overalls during the episode. Another man said he never seen it, but would always hear its baleful wails frequently through the night. Not like the regular wolf or coyote. No, he said. It was more deeper, longer, stronger sounding than anything that would come out of any animal I have ever heard. Another old-timer said his wife had seen it trying to get into the chicken coop, but gave up after it got tangled in the chicken wire. They all had tales of someone's hound dog getting killed, ripped apart limb from limb, someone's pig or cow or chicken getting eaten, the mysterious footprints left in the mud, and the stench it left behind wherever it appeared. And more than one had the same story of listening to the walk across their front porches at night, and the scratches on their doors and walls, which would leave deep gouges in the wood. They would find that in the morning. All of them agreed that this was not a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It would be only another year or two after hearing about this mysterious beast that I would have an encounter myself. Now, these are statements made from Jan Thompson, who grew up in the L.B.L, and her encounter I've shared on this channel just a couple of days ago. Her nephew was ripping through the woods on the trails with his dirt bike, and the creature followed him home, tearing his Levi's and causing, a gash in his leg. The creature then stalked these young kids to their home. They barricaded themselves in the house, hid under the bed until the aunt or mom came back, and then it was gone. Very terrifying encounter, but a little more history that I wanted to share with you. Today's final part of the upload is an encounter that happened right around that area. It was probably a couple years ago. No, actually 2013. I had just started driving my truck. I got my truck after being trained and everything. I drove from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Cherokee, Alabama. I've been driving. I didn't drive straight through, but I got up early this one day and got my load there on time. I was taking this load of paper, scrap paper, to Cherokee, Alabama, to a plant that makes tissue down in Cherokee. So I had gotten up early to finish out my load so I could get there on time. I drove probably 8 hours or something like that. Got my load delivered, picked up my trailer, got a hold of my dispatcher to find out what he wanted me to do next. He didn't have any work for me, so I said, I'm going to lie down for a little while. So I went in a little truck stop that was just down the road and took a nap. Got up and decided to have some lunch. Got some lunch, and while I was eating my lunch, I decided to get my next load, which was in Decatur, Alabama, which was probably an hour away or something like that from where I was in Cherokee. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, somewhere in that range. So I went to pull out on this road, and there was this big black truck, all lifted up, all jacked up and everything, a large pickup truck. So I thought I'd let him go first, because he was moving. So when he passed, I pulled out and I got the whole truck straightened out. I got probably maybe, if I'd have to guess, 30 feet away from this guy. There's a big U.S. highway down there in Alabama
There are 2 lanes going one way and 2 lanes going the other way, divided by mediums between them and then trees. You're kind of driving through the woods, trees on both sides of the road. If I had to guess, it was maybe 50 yards from the trees to the trees, maybe a little more, something like that. I'm driving along, just getting the truck straightened out, seeing what's going on around me. All of a sudden, out of the woods to my right, this thing came running, and it was running fast, and I mean fast. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was fast. So fast that I couldn't really tell you what it was, but I tell you this, it made that clearing from the woods to the road, which I could tell you was a good-sized clearing. It made that clearing from the woods to the road in about 10 steps. That's how fast it was going. That's how big the strides it was taking. But anyway, it crossed out in front of the road, and that big black truck in front of me, I don't even know if he knew that he hit it, but he hit it. Hit it right in the hip and turned it around, twisted around, and it fell in a ball on the shoulder. The guy didn't pay no attention to it. I was thinking, what the heck was that thing? I know what it looked like, but I didn't want to sound crazy, so I drove by it. My windows were down because I was smoking, and so I'm slowing down to kind of look at it and see what it is. I'm looking out my window, and it's balled up in this ball. Whatever it was a big ball. This truck was jacked up, and it hit this thing in the hip, and it fell into a ball on the ground. When I drove by it, it was not dead, but it was mad, and I could see it. I could see all its hair. I couldn't see it, but it was mad. You could hear it, making this loud grunting noise like it was pissed. I went, well, whatever. I was like, I think I just saw a Bigfoot. Again, I don't know what it was. But I swear to God, I was not tired. I was not crazy. This thing wasn't big, enormous, like 7 or 8 feet tall, like how you'd think a Bigfoot would be. It was probably 6 feet tall. It wasn't enormously large, but still big. You could see when I drove by, loaded with muscle underneath all that hair. I got my load and I drove for a little while, got parked for the night, called Mrs. Irish Smoking Man, told him about it. They were still in amazement. My mom said, why didn't you go back and take a picture? Because I didn't know what it was. A bear? If it was a Bigfoot? I didn't know what it was. All I knew was that it was mad, and I wasn't going to figure out what it was in case it ripped me in half. Got home that weekend. We had a big party because my ex-sister-in-law had just graduated from nursing school. We all went out to dinner. Me, my brother, family, and her family and everything. We're kind of close with that family. So I told her dad about what I had seen. And he said that it was a bear. I never seen a bear other than in the zoo or on TV, so maybe it was a bear. But when I think of a bear, I don't think of a bear as running on its hind legs. When a bear gets up on its hind legs, it's more of an intimidation type thing. I see him take a couple steps, but I don't see him full out sprinting, running, and always think of that bear's hind legs. At least my head being a stubby kind of legs. This thing was fast, and it had big, huge, like normal people legs. But it had big, long arms. It took that stride like 10 steps before it crossed the road, and then crossed the road in like 2. That's my encounter, I guess. I don't know if it was a Bigfoot, Dogman, or what, but that's what I saw. All right, folks, which one of those video clips do you, or how do you feel about those video clips? That's a better question. I have my own opinion. I feel that one is just kind of, I won't even entertain the idea. And then the other, I have really sat and watched it and tried to debunk it and have a hard time. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Your support is what makes this channel so special and what makes this channel continue to grow and go. It is truly appreciated. Guys, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share a little bit of information, that same info we share with each other here on a daily basis. And it may just help save someone that you love and care about's life someday. God bless you all.